The Honourable Sophie McNeill.
Thank you very much, President, and I congratulate you on your re-election. We are on Wajak Noongar Budja, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. This land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I acknowledge First Nations communities across this state and all traditional owners and traditional custodians across country. I'd also like to acknowledge Uncle Hedley and Auntie Lynn, who are here today in the gallery. I acknowledge the devastating impact that colonisation has had on First Nations people throughout Western Australia. The massacres, the slavery, the stolen generations. I acknowledge I'm now part of the parliamentary apparatus that perpetrated these crimes. I acknowledge successive governments in this state that have locked up children, split families apart and overseen deaths in custody. Injustices that continue to this day. Truth, treaty and justice is how this country will heal and move forward together. The critical need for governments to uphold and protect human rights and the devastating cost when they fail in this responsibility has been the defining focus of my life. It's taken me around the world to incredible places where I've met the most brave, courageous people you could ever imagine. And it's now brought me back home to Western Australia. And the reason I'm in this place now is because the decisions being made here in this state are having profound human rights consequences within and beyond our borders. And so to begin my time in this Parliament, I want to share some of these experiences and the stories of these awe-inspiring people. Of those who defy and resist when the odds are so heavily stacked against them. And those who inspire and motivate me every day to strive for change. I want to highlight the brutal consequences and suffering I've witnessed when politicians and leaders have squandered their moment in history to lead, or have chosen to look the other way. Because now is our moment in this critical decade of climate action. It will come down to us and choices made in places like this. It all began for me in 1999 when I was 14. My wonderful mother, Elise, brought me a copy of the book Hidden Agendas by the Australian journalist John Pilger. John had snuck into East Timor to document the horrors of the Indonesian military occupation. I was blown away to realise that my government had greenlit Jakarta's illegal invasion of East Timor, and that they'd then spent decades turning a blind eye to the mass killing and atrocities the Indonesian forces inflicted upon civilians there. I was so outraged. I was in Year 9 and I couldn't believe no one had ever taught me this stuff. The testimony of these East Timorese torture survivors hit me like a gut punch. I remember thinking so clearly that now I knew about this injustice, I had a responsibility to try and do something about it. And so I joined the East Timorese community movement here in Perth. It was the lead up to the vote for East Timor's long-awaited vote for independence. And the key demand for our movement was that the international community protect the East Timorese during that referendum. But the Howard government ignored our calls, and we all watched in horror as the Indonesian militia began a systematic campaign of violence and destruction after the successful independence vote was announced. But this time, Australians refused to allow their government to betray the East Timorese. Across this country, tens of thousands of us took to the streets, demanding that Canberra send peacekeepers to intervene and protect East Timor civilians. I remember speaking in the Perth CBD at a SNAP rally to a crowd of thousands, possibly tens of thousands. All the union movements were there, high schoolers like myself. People left their office buildings to come and join this SNAP rally as Dili burned. I was on stage speaking alongside Domingos Oliveira, a Perth-based East Timorese independence hero who'd spent decades fighting for his country's independence in exile, and I'm honoured that his daughter Nydia is here today. It was such an amazing moment of pride as Australians rose up and demanded action. And finally, the Howard government relented, sending in Australian peacekeepers. 450 East Timorese families were airlifted by those peacekeepers out of the UN compound in Dili, and they came here to Perth, Western Australia, to stay at the Lewin Army Barracks in East Fremantle, not far from where my father, Jared, lived. I spent 6 months volunteering at that barracks nearly every day, as a Year 10 student, hearing firsthand what these families had endured at the hands of the Indonesian military. It was a harrowing education into the horrors that governments are capable of. From that point on, I was determined to devote my life to trying to prevent further injustice, further suffering. And I chose journalism. I've never been very patient, so I jumped straight in. And Chris Hill, my incredible teacher at Hollywood High School, who's in the gallery today and seems to have brought his whole class with him, Chris lent me Hollywood High's brand new video camera. And I somehow managed to talk Mum, Clint, Dad and Leonie into letting me spend my Year 11 school holidays up in East Timor. I made my first little documentary about a desperately under-resourced medical clinic in Dili and the health crisis that was crippling the newly independent nation. The Timorese had their freedom, but the rest of the world had moved on, and people were dying from preventable diseases like TB and malaria, just an hour and a half north of Darwin. One little self-funded film led to another, and one day, Mike Carey, an executive producer at SBS News in Sydney, called my mobile. I may have only been 18, but they were desperate for video journalists in Western Australia and had no contacts, clearly. They'd heard about my little documentaries and wondered would I be keen to pitch them some stories. I quit university the next day and jumped on a plane to Sydney. I spent the next few years growing up in the SBS newsroom, mentored by Australia's best investigative journalists. They took me under their wing and taught me everything I know. And the first report I did for SBS was a 30-minute investigation into the death of a 41-year-old Palestinian asylum seeker. His name was Mohammed Saleh. So this was 2003, and Mohammed was the first asylum seeker to die under Australia's mandatory detention policy. He'd been born in Al Yarmouk camp in Damascus, and Mohammed fled to Australia to escape political persecution after he was detained and tortured by the Assad regime. Arriving by boat, Mohammed was taken to Port Hedland Detention Centre here in WA, where the Howard government incarcerated him in horrific, cruel conditions. Mohammed's asylum application was refused by the inhumane and heartless then Immigration Minister Philip Ruddock. Mohammed became desperately ill, incredibly depressed after that decision, but his pleas for help and treatment were dismissed and ignored month after month after month. I worked with refugee advocates Jack Smith, Charandev Singh, Elizabeth Lacey and Pamela Kerr to obtain the documents that proved the cruel medical neglect by our government. Mohammed died of a large tumour in his stomach, alone and heartbroken, here in this place where he'd fled for safety and protection. And so many more refugees and asylum seekers have since died in our care from neglect and suicide. And Australia's inhumane, cruel and illegal policies towards asylum seekers have now continued for 2 decades, supported by both major parties. It's a political decision that is inherently racist and xenophobic, and it's disguised as a humanitarian and a national security policy. I was in the SBS newsroom as the invasion of Iraq unfolded on screens in front of me. The deliberate lies of governments, including our own, and the scale of the mass civilian death and suffering drew me to the Middle East. And just commenting on this past weekend's events in Iran, we just cannot afford another illegal and preemptive war, and I pray we do not follow that same path that I saw back in 2003. So I arrived in Beirut at age 20 with not much else but my trusty video camera. SBS only brought me a flak jacket after my union complained after they saw me on the news next to a tank firing shells and I wasn't wearing one. So the wonderful city of Beirut would become my home for the next few years as I travelled around the region reporting for SBS. I still remember my first day working in the occupied West Bank in 2006. During my brief time at university, I studied under the guidance of the brilliant Dr. Victoria Mason. And I'd learnt the history of Israel and Palestine and read everything that I could about this place and its people. But nothing could have prepared me for the deliberate cruelty and suffering that Israel's occupation inflicts on the Palestinian people. The systematic oppression and denial of all rights that continues to this day. The checkpoints, the road closures, the permits, the housing demolitions, the arrest of children, detention without charge, torture, daily killings with no one to appeal to. 3 million people condemned to endless suffering as successive governments continue to allow the Israeli government to operate with complete impunity. And even back then, it wasn't hard to see where this was heading. On my first day in Gaza in 2007, our SBS producer, Raad Al-Thamna, took me straight to a hospital in Khan Yunis. An Israeli shelling attack had just killed several civilians, and I was pushed by the crowd into the emergency room cubicle to film young men and women with their limbs blown off. I can't count how many times I've stood filming by bedsides in hospitals across the Middle East, next to dying and dead civilians, as loved ones wept in despair. And of course I felt like I shouldn't be there in that moment of grief and utter despair, but the families always insisted that I stay, that I keep filming. They wanted the world to see what was happening to them, to know, to stop this. My producer, Ryan, and I produced a Walkley Award-winning report in Gaza on that trip, just one of dozens of stories that we worked together on over the years. And without Raad in Gaza, I was nothing. He was my eyes, my ears, my translator, my driver, my everything. He's such a lovely, kind, gentle man, never without a twinkle in his eye, never without a cheeky grin. Raad could manage any situation, no matter how terrifying or stressful it became. And after we'd finished reporting for the day, we'd go and pick up his 7 kids, pile into the back of his big car, and we'd all go and have a meal by the sea. He and his family were still recovering from the trauma of an Israeli attack on their home that previous year. 19 members of Raad's extended family were massacred in their beds while they slept, as an Israeli artillery attack landed on their home, later described by the IDF as a technical malfunction. Raad moved to a new home to try and escape the memories and rebuild, and then came the 2009 Israeli war on Gaza. By now, the territory was besieged on all sides by Egypt and Israel, and there was and continues to be no escape. Gaza is the world's largest prison. During that war in 2009, Raad and his family endured unimaginable horror as they were besieged for 3 weeks by Israeli forces. They finally escaped, and when they returned home, their home was completely destroyed. My lovely dear friend once again had to rebuild and try to recover. And once again, Israel was not held to account for these atrocities. Their war crimes and massacres against civilians went unpunished. We can't say we didn't know. In 2009, I turned my investigative lens on war crimes in Afghanistan, this time perpetrated at the hands of Australian forces. A deadly incident in Uruzgan province saw Australian commandos kill 5 children in the dead of the night after they raided a compound without proper clearance or approval. We tracked down the survivors and I interviewed them in Kabul. And at that stage, the ADF hadn't even bothered to try to find these surviving family members, let alone offer any compensation. Our investigation came nearly a decade before the broader war crimes allegations against Australian forces in Afghanistan surfaced. And so my team and I were attacked by the Sydney shock jocks and slandered for our work. But we were vindicated. I was proud to work directly with the then very brave Brigadier Lynn McDade, the Director of Military Prosecutions. And she ultimately charged 3 Australian commandos with manslaughter over that incident, the first such charges since Vietnam. It was a trip home from Beirut one Christmas, though, where I met Ruben, the love of my life. He was planning a fairly quiet existence, surfing and making wine in Margaret River, before I ruined everything. Ruben's the most patient, gentle, kind soul that you'll ever meet, so opposites clearly attract. And I honestly do not know where I would be without his unwavering love, devotion and rock-solid support for the past 17 years. Ruben's career took a back step as he became the primary carer for our 2 beautiful boys, Nathaniel and Quinn. And by then I was at the ABC in Sydney reporting for Foreign Correspondent. Our firstborn Nat came to Syria in my belly, and Quinn came to Gaza in my tummy. And I was away a lot when they were little, often for weeks on end. Reuben did a brilliant job, and he still does, but it was a really tough time. And my boys knew from a young age that they had to share me with other kids that they knew were not as lucky as them. But they always so generously let me go without complaint. I was appointed the ABC's Middle East correspondent in 2015, and we arrived in Jerusalem with 4-year-old Nat, 2-year-old Quinn, and a region on fire. In Syria, Russia had just stepped in to help Assad violently attack opposition-held towns and cities across the country. Saudi Arabia had begun a massive aerial bombing campaign on its poverty-stricken neighbour, Yemen, which was fully backed and armed by our ally, the USA. My dear friend Raed in Gaza had just endured his third war in 6 years, and Islamic State militants had taken over large swathes of Iraq and eastern Syria, forcing millions of civilians to live under their brutal rule. In every story I covered across the Middle East, civilians were enduring unspeakable fear and suffering as a consequence of political choices and global inaction. I filmed starving toddlers dying in front of me in Yemen as the Saudi regime blocked food from entering that country. I recorded doctors begging over the phone for help as their hospitals were bombed in Aleppo, interviewed families on the outskirts of Mosul as they wept, describing how ISIS had used them as human shields during coalition bombardment. And I sat with distraught children in Gaza whose parents had died after Israeli authorities blocked them from leaving the Strip to receive life-saving cancer treatments not available inside. The steady stream of human rights abuses, most perpetrated by state actors upon innocent civilians, was hard to comprehend. What had our world become? This complete breakdown in international law, this litany of abuses was meticulously documented. It was filmed, it was streamed live online, and sometimes it even went viral. But after a while, I became too ashamed to ask a Syrian trapped inside to give me any of their precious time or energy to help report what was happening. As one of my Syrian contacts told me at the time, "Please, we're sick of filming it and taking photos. You've seen it all. You know exactly what's happening to us. Just let us die in peace." We can't say we didn't know. One of the stories that haunts me the most from that time was the deliberate use of starvation as a weapon of war by the Assad regime in Syria. A contact at Médecins Sans Frontières, my favourite charity doing incredible work all around the world, they told me that they were hearing stories of people starving to death in a little town called Madaya. Hezbollah forces were besieging the town and no food was allowed in and no one allowed out. So I received the WhatsApp number of a doctor working there, and his name was Dr. Khalid. And my brilliant ABC producer, Fuad Abu Ghosh, and I set to work. We exchanged voice messages with Dr. Khalid, and he sent us photos and videos of these starving and emaciated children arriving in his clinic each day, and of those who'd already died due to a lack of food. And Fuad and I were the first to report these horrific images taken in Dr. Khalid's clinic. At first, people sat up and took notice. Children starving to death just 40 kilometres from Damascus, where there were UN warehouses full of food. It was a shocking new low even for Syria's depraved war. Khalid's photos and videos featured on the front pages of newspapers and TV networks around the world. And the then US ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, even referred to them at the UN General Assembly in New York. Khalid's bravery and our reporting helped get some food into Madaya, but it was only temporary and Assad was never held to account. And this despicable tactic was then repeated time and time again throughout Syria as the world looked the other way. Khalid, the doctor, who actually turned out to be a nurse who taught himself how to do surgery on YouTube, he became wanted by the Syrian regime. A price on Khalid's head. He managed to escape Madaya, crossing a field of landmines, where he walked for 3 days to get to Lebanon. We brought Khalid's case to the attention of the Australian Embassy in Beirut. And to cut a long story short, we now have this human rights hero living here in Perth, Western Australia. And I'm so honoured to have my brother Khalid and his amazing wife Jumana with us today. Khalid, you and Jumana and the kids mean so much to me. It brings me so much joy to see you all here, safe in building a beautiful new life. And for us to see Assad finally fall. After 3 years in Jerusalem as a correspondent, I was offered the chance to come back to Sydney and to work at Four Corners. The focus was still mass human rights abuses, but this time it was a lot closer to home. Genevieve McGregor, Echo Hui, Nathan Rusa and I worked with brave members of the Australian Uyghur community to uncover the scale of China's mass detention of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. This is the largest incarceration of people on the basis of their religion since the Holocaust. The CCP taking children from their families and placing them in boarding homes, putting millions in a dystopian prison system where they're forced to renounce their beliefs. It's the systematic destruction of a way of life, of a people. And one of the highlights of my journalistic career was helping Saddam Abdus-Salam's family escape from Xinjiang and reunite with him in Adelaide. Saddam, you and Adila deserve so much peace and happiness. I adore watching your family grow. And Almas, we have not forgotten you and Zainab. Your strength and patience will be rewarded, and we will also bring Zainab home, I promise. While at Four Corners, I witnessed the astounding bravery of Hong Kongers who refused to submit to Beijing's authoritarian rule. This was an incredible moment in world history. Here in our region, millions of Hong Kongers marched on the streets to demand their freedoms, for democracy, freedom of expression, the right to free speech. So many things that we here take for granted. And yet the Chinese Communist Party violently suppressed this movement, locking up hundreds of peaceful pro-democracy protesters and leaders. And I honour the bravery of my Chinese and Hong Konger pro-democracy activists and friends. Ya Chao Wang, Kevin Yam, Vicky Xu, Badiao Chow, you have taught me so much about standing up for what you believe in. You've risked everything and have lost so much, and I can't put into words how much admiration I have for all of you. But it was my last trip for Four Corners in 2019 that began the chain of events that sees me here today. 3 weeks spent in the Brazilian Amazon, the lungs of the world, a critical carbon sink. But what I witnessed there on the back roads of Para State was crushing, as we documented the scale of the Bolsonaro government's deliberate destruction of the rainforest. Large-scale clearing as far as the eye can see for industrial farming, mile after mile of illegal logging. If this destruction continues, coupled with warming temperatures, we could see the Amazon pushed to a tipping point in our lifetimes, where it can no longer sustain itself or continue to absorb carbon, where the Amazon will no longer have a net cooling impact on our climate. And I can still remember the chills down my spine as I interviewed the Nobel Prize-winning Brazilian climate scientist Carlos Nobre, as he explained his climate predictions for this century. And that was my light bulb moment. The climate crisis is the biggest global threat to human rights that we've seen in our lifetime. I realised that all the other suffering that I'd witnessed over the years would pale into insignificance if we don't get this one right. That rising sea levels and massive food shortages could drive hundreds of millions of people from their homes. And that conflicts over increasingly scarce resources could multiply exponentially, fueling violence, virulent nationalism, xenophobia, and authoritarian rule. That the capacity of states to protect the rights of the most at-risk populations could be severely strained and in many places broken. This was the big one, and I realised that being a journalist wasn't enough. It was clear that the scale of the crises facing us, the climate emergency, the breakdown in the rules-based order, and the rise of authoritarian rule, they all required more than just reporting what is wrong with the world. I wanted to do something to change this, to try and solve these problems, like all the amazing, defiant activists and advocates that I'd met over the decades. And so I quit Four Corners and I joined Human Rights Watch, spending 3 wonderful years learning from the world's best human rights advocates and international legal minds. And after 18 years away, this new job enabled me to return to Perth, the place I'd left as a teenager. And our boys who'd never lived here could grow up next to our wonderful family. I would travel to Canberra to brief ministers, MPs and their staff on urgent human rights issues, including the need to stop approving new fossil fuel projects. I remember meeting with WA's Environment Minister at the time, armed with all the science and the evidence and the legal arguments of why he would be failing in his human rights obligations if he approved Woodside's massive new gas project. But it all fell on deaf ears. I quickly realised this town is one of the hardest places to be a climate activist. The tactics of the fossil fuel lobby here remind me of the authoritarian regimes and human rights abuses that I know so well. Companies like Woodside and Chevron with unlimited budgets to spread their lies and misinformation. And just in case anyone in this chamber needs it clarified, here are the facts. Liquefied natural gas, LNG, is a dangerous fossil fuel, which today is regarded as almost as harmful to our climate as coal due to methane emissions during production. And our beautiful Western Australia, our state, our home, we're the world's 3rd largest exporter of this dangerous stuff, supplying 13% of the world's LNG. We are a key exporter of fossil fuels. So despite our small population, we here in WA are responsible for a disproportionately large part of this growing climate emergency. This is on us. And everything the climate scientists warned about us for decades is now underway. The fires, the floods, the melting ice caps, the hottest dry summer on record in Perth last year, where all across this city, decades-old native trees dropped dead and large swathes of forests in our southwest collapsed. We're seeing unprecedented, record-breaking marine heat waves right now, the bleaching of our beautiful Ningaloo Reef. And if we don't urgently reduce our emissions in order to limit warming, there are large parts of the north of this state that will become unlivable in this century. First Nations communities that after tens of thousands of years of existence could become climate refugees in their own country as a consequence of just a few hundred years of greed and disregard for nature. What sticks in my mind so strongly as I do this work on climate are all those broken parents that I met across the Middle East. Parents whose worlds were shattered by their inability to promise their children, "Don't worry, everything will be okay." But this is what the climate emergency will do to all of us, every one of us, if governments continue to fail to act. If parliaments like this one continue to fail to protect future generations and keep approving new fossil fuel projects, if they keep approving new gas projects. And so after a career devoted to facts, evidence and human rights, there was only one political movement for me to join. There was only one political movement that will fight to protect our climate and our beautiful planet and all of its natural wonders. And only one political movement devoted to upholding everyone's rights everywhere. and I'm so proud to be here in this chamber representing the Greens WA. That pride has only been reinforced by the Greens' staunch, unwavering stance against the genocide that Israel is currently perpetrating in Gaza. Like the other 2.5 million Palestinians trapped there, my dear friend Ra'ad and his family, who have already suffered so much, are enduring unspeakable terror once again. This lovely man, who I've known for nearly half my life, he's no different to me or you. He loves his kids no less than me or you. He loves Allah, same as me or you, exactly like us. He spent 20 months now living in absolute fear every single day. Once again, his home has been destroyed by the Israeli army. They were forced to flee to the south, and then Khan Yunis was destroyed, and then they went to Rafah, and Rafah was destroyed, and they went to Muwasi, where they were narrowly escaped death there. And Ra'ad's there on my WhatsApp every few days when he gets some charge to his phone. Sophie, the kids are sick. We are so hungry. We can't find any food. The deliberate starvation of children, of babies, of a people by the Israeli government in front of our eyes, and the world shrugs. And our federal government refuses still to take a single concrete step to hold Netanyahu and Israel to account. We won't forget those who stayed silent during this genocide, who greenlit the invasion and paved the way for these horrors. And I'll be using my time in Parliament to be a loud voice speaking out and interrogating West Australia's involvement with AUKUS. We don't want the future of our WA communities, of the beautiful city of Coburn where I live, intrinsically intertwined with the US military and its illegal wars, and this genocide that it is arming and funding. The US is increasingly hell-bent on undermining international law and global human rights norms, and we must not be complicit. I'd like to acknowledge my dear friends Ayman Quadir and Samiha Elwan, and their sons Tamim and Sari, who are with us today. Ayman and Samiha's immediate family are trapped in Gaza. Ayman's sister and his nieces and nephews killed in Israeli airstrikes. Ayman and Samiha, you mean so much to me. You're my family. I honour your tireless advocacy and acknowledge the incredible load and sorrow that you both carry. And I'm so grateful for your friendship and to know you both. And I'm so sorry that we haven't been able to stop this yet. In closing, there are so many special people for me to thank. Thank you to each and every single Greens candidate and volunteer whose hard work got the four of us in here. We're only here because of you. Thank you to all our incredible members. You're the heart and soul of our movement. And a special shout out to my amazing Freo crew. Thank you to our State Director, Dean Smith, and all the hardworking office and campaign staff who worked tirelessly during back-to-back elections. Thank you to past and former Greens MPs, Joe Valentine, Maureen Faruqi, Giz Watson, Scott Ludlam, David Shoebridge, and Pete Wish-Wilson. Thank you for your incredible support and guidance. Thank you to everyone in the Perth Movement for Palestine, each and every one of you for showing up week after week after week. To Friends of Palestine WA, the Palestinian community of WA, Students for Palestine, Jews for Palestine, healthcare workers and academics for Palestine, Muslim Votes Matter, and the amazing Perth Mums for Palestine. Thank you to my dear friends Hiba Farah and Hala Shanable. Thank you for all you do. And to my WA climate campaigner mates, you have one of the hardest jobs around, and I admire you all so deeply. Thank you to my dear friends at the Conservation Council. I'm so privileged to know and have worked with you all. Thank you to Bill Hare, West Australia's most famous climate scientist. Your support and amazing work to protect our climate for so many decades is so honoured, it's so appreciated, and I celebrate and honour your work, Bill. Thank you to Jess Panegyris for all you taught me and all your incredible efforts to protect our climate. And thank you to everyone in Disrupt Borough Pub. You are heroes, and in time, all will celebrate your bravery. To my besties, Dia, Olivia, Kate, Sarah, Amos, Alan and Molly, I wish you all lived closer. I miss you all so much, and I'm sorry I'm so bad at replying to messages. I get a lot of them, and that goes generally to everyone. But most importantly, thank you to my wonderful, wonderful family. Without you all and your amazing love and support over the years, I wouldn't be here. The love and help that Ruben and I received last year after my health scare meant the world. We couldn't have got through it without you all. Thank you to Mum and Clint for all your love, support and guidance over the years, for passing on the joy of travel and adventure and gardening, and for always being there for me, backing me in and cheering me on. Dad and Leonie, thank you for everything, for being my biggest fans, for all your support to our boys, and for being my fellow Dockers Tragics. And for the wonderful family that you've built, bringing us 6 girls together. Thank you, Holly and Amy, for your love and support. And to Courtney, Asher, and Ella, words cannot express how much you all mean to me and how influential having you 3 as my sisters has been to my life. You're always my first port of call, my safety check, my sense check. I love you all so much, and I'm so grateful not to just have you as sisters, but as best friends. Thank you, Sandy, Mark, and Amelia, my wonderful, fun in-laws. And to my Ruben, you are my everything. The load you have carried in our family has been immense. You're the most wonderful father, and your support to me, Nat and Quinn, goes above and beyond every time. You are our rock, our fun, and our happiness, and we adore you so much. And finally, to my sons, Nat and Quinn, you are my greatest joy, and I'm so proud of you both. Your big hearts and your kindness, how much you know and care about the world. I love your delight and deep appreciation of our natural world and all its beauty. From those endless days exploring the hills of Jerusalem to your obsession now with the ocean and the surf. I am worried now that you're teenagers that you've taken my rejection of authority a bit too seriously. Don't take after me. And I don't care what your grandparents let me do. You're not allowed to go to East Timor when you're 15. But you both put up with a lot. It's not easy having me as a mum. But you know that this work is all for you. And it's for your cousins that we all love so much. And it's for kids everywhere, no matter where they are born or where they live. We must protect this beautiful planet for future generations so that I can look into the eyes of Nat and Quinn and genuinely promise that it's all going to be okay. Thank you. Michelle. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Thank you. Thank you, mate. Cheers. Thanks, Anthony. Cheers. Thanks for this. Thanks. Thank you, mate. Cheers. Thanks, Marika. Cheers. Thanks, Rod. Cheers. Thank you, Neil. Cheers. Thanks. Congratulations. We're very lucky to have your heart and your mind.
Video, Steve.